It is a great privilege for me to be in conversation with truly one of the seminal thinkers of the Jewish community, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg. And I show his new book, his 12th book, The Triumph of Life, which in many ways is the culmination of your lifetime of thought and engagement. We are in celebration of this achievement. There is so much that I want to talk with you about, and I am aware of the limitation on time. And I am also aware that you, my dear teacher, Rabbi Yitz, are in Yerushalayim, as Sherelle is in Tel Aviv, and that there's always the possibility of a siren. I have a friend who lives in Jerusalem who made Aliyah, who says that to live today in Israel is to be on the playing field of Jewish history. To be outside of Israel is to be in the bleachers watching. How would you react to that as an opening, Rabbi Yitz? Is that the case? Is to be in Israel in this moment to be on the playing field of history?
Well, let me put it this way. Obviously, Israelis are exposed in a moment of crisis with this war, of course, is the climax of a past year and a half where we've had a series of, first starting with the catastrophe of October 7th and going on. So to be an Israeli during this period is very much to be conscious of being on the fighting field. I'm not sure about the playing fields of history. I would say as follows, maybe I can push it to the book. What I argue in the book is that the great challenge, the great message, not just the Jewish message, to the whole of humanity developing in modern culture was the idea that humans take power, and they take power to achieve the goals, many of which we identified with Judaism or Jewish messianism. In other words, the idea of perfecting the world, tikkun olam, the idea of overcoming the enemies of life like poverty and hunger and war. These are classic Jewish ideas. Modernity came along and said, don't wait. I'll give you the Jewish version of this, the Zionist version. Don't wait for the Messiah. Don't wait for God to send some miraculous Redeemer. You take charge, and you can make a better world and bring all these dreams to fruition. And the result of this was a tremendous amount of accomplishment. Modernity has then made tremendous strides in overcoming poverty and hunger and oppression, the spread of equality, and so on. That having been said, the Jewish people, except for a small minority, didn't get that message. The majority, before World War II, the majority of Orthodox Jews were anti-Zionist. And the majority of liberal or secular Jews was also either non-Zionist or anti-Zionist because they didn't want to lose their standing. After the Holocaust, the Jewish people woke up and realized this is the point. If you don't take power, we're living in a world where there's such concentrations of power that evil people can use this power for unprecedented evil. And of course, that's what the Nazis did in the Holocaust attempt at a final solution of the Jewish problem to wipe out all the Jewish people. So we had no serious choice either to disappear as Jews or to take power. And I want to say for the record, it wasn't just Jews who got this message. Since World War II, women got the message. We've had a women's liberation movement. African Americans got the message. We've had this major civil rights movement. Gay liberation. In short, all around the world, the anti-colonial revolt got the same message. You are in a world where if you don't have enough power to protect yourself, you're at risk not just of losing, but of being totally destroyed. Now, here's my response to your question of the playing fields. What we're seeing now in Israel, of course, Israel starts as the Jewish people taking power. What we're seeing now is what an amazing accomplishment the Jewish people have done in taking power. Let's put it this way. This is a people that had no history of military effort. For 2,000 years, we had no army. Much of the destruction of the Holocaust is because we had no country of haven and no army to come and defend us. In these 75, 77 years, we see Israel has managed to create an army of, we're a nation of 10 million people, a nation of 6, 7 million Jews, has developed one of the strongest armies and the strongest air forces in the whole world. So yes, the extent to which Israel now has bounced back from this catastrophe, and that's what happens when you would live in a world of power. There's no guarantees, and you can be tricked, you can be defeated soundly in a particular battle. But Israel has not only bounced back, but has shown, first in its demolition of Hamas, and its unfinished demolition perhaps of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of playing an important role in the overthrow of the Syrian dictatorship, and now in this confrontation with Iran, which is so my answer personally is, we're at the center of the fighting field of this moment of Jewish history, where war and armies and military power is crucial. That having been said, American diaspora Jews are not bystanders. First of all, Israel itself needs, it's not got, all its power is not enough to give it safety. It needs the American alliance in particular, and American Jews have a central role in making that alliance possible and keeping it strong. So you're not a bystander. If you are, you're doing something wrong. But if you take part in the responsibility, well, how about the philanthropic rally to support Israel? And in fact, let me finish one last point here, because we're talking about the Orange County Scholars Program. The unfinished task of Jewish history is not just taking power for life as it is in Israel. It's meeting the test of choice, of freedom, of opportunity on an unparalleled scale throughout the world. The choice is assimilation and disintegration, or a renewal and a deepening of Jewish life. So there too, with all due respect, it's not more urgent right now than fighting and the risk and the drama of life and death, but it's no less crucial for the Jewish future. If American and diaspora Jewry rallies spiritually, culturally, and values, then the Jewish future will be there and Israel will need that support. If the people do not rally, then all of Israel's great successes will not save the diaspora community.
Well, your response underscores in this moment how all our eyes are on Israel, and in contrast to the quote, underscores how all of Jewry is needed and intertwined and empowered. The focus for our conversation begins where you are, which is in Israel and the challenge of this moment. But your book is what we're looking to also unpack. But before I get to the book, I want to start in another place, maybe because Father's Day is just a few days ago. And the first time I met you, which is close to 40 years ago as a rabbinical school student on a CLAL retreat, one of those organizations that you helped create, you told me the story of your father standing up to the kashrut mob and how it taught you courage. So you've lived a life of courage. Briefly, how did your father stand up for courage?
Thank you for mentioning him. It's really, it has been a very powerful force in my life. My father grew up as an orphan. He became a Talmid Chacham, a scholar of Torah. It became his whole life. He was like what we call a classic Litvak. The most valuable, precious thing in his life was teaching, learning Talmud, and he learned with his children and with me. I was very fortunate that way. My father, in order to make a living from teaching Talmud, those days you couldn't make a living. He did earn a few dollars, but it wasn't enough. So he became a shochet, a slaughterer of kosher chickens. And those two jobs together gave a fairly modest, if not poor, livelihood, but he was very, very content with that. As a shochet, however, in those days, you had to join a union. There was the Shochtim Union, the union of the kosher slaughterers. Unfortunately, this was in the 40s. Many unions, particularly small local unions, were invaded or taken over by thieves and crooks. And the agent of the union of the Shochtim was a man named Charlie Herbert, better known to the federal authorities as Chicky. He was a known criminal. And the truth is that they, among other things, under their contract, they collected money supposedly being put aside for retirement and for pensions for the Shochtim when they got old. But if you followed the Teamster union business in the 50s and 60s, they did a lot of the same thing. They invested the money of the so-called money of the pensions in risky things, in criminal things, in things for their friends and the accomplices. Anyway, the long and the short of it is that my father and a number of other people in the Union Shochtim, they were certainly not politically or any other way organized, but realized what's going on, that in fact, they're being cheated and they're being misled. And if you don't wake up and stop this, there's a good chance that in the end, they will end up with no pensions and no economic security. My father and two or three other of his friends, he got together, talked about it, and they decided to go visit a racket-busting new up-and-coming U.S. attorney. His name was Tom Dewey, who later ran for Republican for president. And Dewey made his reputation by breaking the largest and most dangerous gang in New York City. They were called Murder Incorporated. They were led by a Jewish criminal named Louis Lepke, Buchhalter. Anyway, my father went to Dewey, and this was a sad part. They were able, the criminals were able, by getting votes and by staging these things, to get a democratic facade that they were chosen and they were elected legitimately, and therefore they are legitimate. And it turned out that under these circumstances, the U.S. attorney had very limited ability to investigate or to challenge them. And so the truth is, after investigating, he said to my father and their friends, "I'm sorry I can't help you because they are protected by they have their rights by the union contracts and so on." When Chicky Herbert heard this, he of course was furious, and my father and the 3 or 4 other friends, he told the market owners, "Do not hire these people." And basically what he did was, in effect, it can end them. Now, again, I have to say, you have to understand, these are people, they learned Torah, most of them. They were not rough, tough. It was really quite devastating. But my father, he felt he has to do this. He stood up for it. And the truth is, for 2 years, he was, I wouldn't say starving, but he was seriously economically hurt. And my parents suffered, but he said to us all the time, you have to do what's right and you have to be willing to stick your neck out. As it turned out, the United States government was investigating Chicky Herbert, and they caught him like they did Capone. They couldn't get him on his actual crimes. They got him on tax evasion. Anyway, after 2 years more, they indicted him for tax evasion and he was found guilty. And then he was looking for some help. And he asked, his lawyers told him, if you can get people who are clearly not crooks and who are clearly legitimate to speak up for you, the judge, he will make you a shorter sentence. So Herbert went to my father and the others and said, if they would testify to the judge that despite their mistreatment, the fact is that the union is officially paying its salaries, and it is not, at this point, they had no proof that there were pensions were not going to be there. And so if they would say a good word to the judge, he would release them from this boycott exclusion. And so he went back to being a shochet. And this was sort of the economic salvation, because it really couldn't go on much longer without it. But what I learned from my father was that you cannot simply say, well, who am I, or I'm not strong enough. And even if the other side has all the power, you have to be faithful to your own conscience and your own commitment and your belief that it's a world of justice and that a union should protect its workers and look out for their economic well-being. And if you have to confront criminals, you should do so. I must say, it had a profound influence. I hear as a child, particularly those 2 years when, of course, my mother and all of us were in anxiety. We're not going to have money, food on the table. And his continued insistence that he did the right thing and is prepared to pay the price of that. He hopes someday the world will get straightened out. Maybe that inspired me to think, to work on how do we straighten out the world.
Well, I'm glad that you can, and we can record this story honoring your dad. It's clearly a through line in your own story of doing what you feel and say is right, and the courage that you say it with. Just only on one foot, only because I don't want to frame it positively. I want to bring your mom in also. What's one through line from your mom that has guided you?
It's an excellent point too. And I would say, in my mother's case, she had a natural religious spirit. She, women are not that educated, but she prayed very devoutly and regularly. But she had a real sense of God's intimate presence and closeness. It's interesting, one of the main themes of the book, which again is being resisted by some people, I'm saying that the age where God stepped in, did visible miracles, took charge of history, punished the bad guys, is over. That God has deliberately chosen to become hidden, and we're living in the age where God is totally hidden. So how do we know in the presence of God? Well, that's one of the religious challenges of our time, because according to my understanding and the rabbi's understanding, God, who is totally hidden, is totally present. You just have to uncover. You can't live at the surface. If you'll go deeply, you'll find God everywhere, but you have to go deeper. So here we are in a world where God is totally hidden. One of the secrets then is, can you in fact emotionally, personally open up to the presence of God in your life? My mother had that quality. One thing I will never forget, because as a child, you hear that she would light candles every Friday night. And then she would sit there and talk with Hashem and talk with God about, and she would go through each of her children. And she'd say, my older sister, here is it, and this is her challenge, and this is her problem, this is what she needs, Hashem, you have to take care of it. And then she'd go through my oldest, second sister, and then my brother, and then me, and then children or grandchildren eventually. And each case, she would have this natural conversation with God, be there for them, help them, do what they need, and support them. I think she communicated that sense of God's presence. And I must say it has been very helpful. When you say, I don't think I in any way exposed to the risks either my father faced with Chicky-Herbert, I mean, to be fair about that, I have a student who went on to get a PhD in history who did one on the New York State Kashrut. But his professor said he would work with him and guide him only up to 1940. That was 20 years before this. His student said, why? He said, why? He said, because after 1940, they're still alive. I don't want to end up at the bottom of the Hudson River in a cement, shoes. So he would not, so to confront Chicky-Herbert, maybe my father didn't understand the full risk, but it's one thing. So I'm not saying I was in any way like that. But yes, I went through periods when I was going against the mainstream of particularly my denomination, my group, where and as the community was moving to the right, I was perceived as sort of being either heretical or in some way, rebellious. And the truth, there were times when I really felt I'm all alone. It's very hard. Emotionally, you want to give in, you want to be loved by the community, you want to be part of it. But there were times when I felt I'm all alone except for balloon number one and my wife, and number two, my God. And I really felt that sense of God's presence. So if we're in exile, or if we're suffering, or if we're feeling isolated, it's good to know that I'm not alone. That's one of the great Jewish messages. You're not alone.
That's really beautiful that your father gave you the courage to stand up to danger, and your mom gave you the presence of God to allow you to feel cared for. That's really a beautiful, you're very fortunate. And we're very fortunate to have had you with those gifts to lead us. Now, your book presents your life thesis that there are three phases of both Judaism, but of the shifting nature of leadership within the Jewish people and God's presence. That's a lens of history, a historical mindset. I had a great teacher, perhaps you knew Professor Zev Falk, who taught law at Hebrew University. He said the difference between a modern person and a classic thinker of old is the awareness of history, that ideas have periods and influences. In that regard, your idea of three different periods, how would the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Beis Yosef, Yeshiva Novordak, where you attended, how would you have responded to the notion that Judaism has history?
That's a fair question, and I'm not sure. And maybe, it's interesting. Beis Joseph it was a refugee yeshiva when I stumbled into it. They were an offshoot of the so-called Musar movement, which focused on character development and ethics. And one of their great insights, which also has stayed with me, is that Judaism is not just about observances and details. It's about making a human being into a mensch. It's about how you develop a character, kindness and concern and love and so on. So they had a very profound influence on me. That having been said, they did not have exposure to history. And looking back, I think as I began to develop new ideas, I think they were somewhat aware of it. And after I got smicha and after I went to graduate school, I became, certainly by their standards, more radical. I stayed in touch particularly with my Rosh Yeshiva. The one I was closest to was not the main Rosh Yeshiva. His name was Rav Nekwitz. He was the mashgiach, the supervisor of students, dean of students, if you will. He understood that I was departing from some of the standard classic positions, but he really communicated the fact that he thought I was doing it sincerely, out of conviction and not out of opportunism. And he saw that I'm trying in some way to be faithful to the religion and tradition. Let me put it another way. Many Orthodox Jews have this notion, no history, that it's all been the same eternally, and the way you show you're faithful is keep it exactly as it always has been. That's a strength, because Orthodoxy has preserved many observances which could have easily been dropped or have been dropped by liberal groups, which I think are still of great value and inspiration. That having been said, they have been very weak on dealing with change. And the truth is, as a result, they lost a lot of people and a lot of credibility. In other words, because history and change and dynamics have become the standard understanding of almost anybody. And of course, it shows up in biology and evolution, where again, the fundamentalists try to deny evolution, or it shows up in history of halakha, and where in the halakha, there are areas that need improvement. There are, ironically enough, some of those areas, there has been improvement, but that improvement happened 500 or 1,000 years ago. So the present fundamentalists deny it's a change and a development, and they refuse to make the changes needed now. So I would like to believe, I come back to I hope that God understands that this is not an attempt to lighten up or dismiss the past, but to apply and to live it in the present moment. And if you don't do that, you may be doing the opposite. Zionism is a good example. The traditional Jews were being faithful to the Messianic tradition of wait for the divine Redeemer. But after the Holocaust, it's way too late to wait. It's unacceptable. If Elie Wiesel once pointed out that he said when the Rebbe, he went to see the Rebbe and they talked about Holocaust and suffering. So the Rebbe said to him, the suffering of the Holocaust is what the Talmud calls the pangs, the birth pangs, the suffering of the Messiahs. This suffering of the Holocaust is going to bring the the Messiah, you'll see. And that's why it happened. And that makes it worthwhile. So he flew into a rage. He said, what do you mean? Are you telling me there was a divine Redeemer who had the power to come, stop the Holocaust, save the Jewish people? That was the time to come. If he was going to come, that's the time to come. If he didn't come, it's inexcusable. If he had that power and could have saved it and didn't act, it's inexcusable. He would come now. I would despise such a person. I would not respect or follow such a Messiah. So my point only is that I think the key here is if you're not alert to the transformations, if you're not trying to follow God into a new environment, into a new era, and I believe God is trying to get us to go with God into this new era, then you may end up doing the opposite, being the enemy of what God wants and needs at this moment. Yes, so the anti-Zionists, to this day, Neturei Karta, they end up supporting Iranian evil despots who want to wipe out the Jewish people, claiming that the state of Israel is illegitimate. They end up doing the opposite. Instead of helping God's people and sharing in their pain and risk, they end up saying, I'm exempt from the army because I'm studying Torah. So abandoning the rest of the Jews to death and destruction. The only reason they haven't been destroyed is the other Jews are courageous and honest and taking responsibility and doing what God wants them to do, which is to take on power and to protect and save the Jewish people. So I would like to think that my Rosh Hashanah, or at least the people who are trying to follow God, will come to understand, even though we disagree, that this is a legitimate disagreement, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven.
So the key two words in a traditional mode are mitzvah and chiyuv, the command and the obligation. How would you define mitzvah and chiyuv for you?
Good. That's an excellent example. My thesis on 1 foot from the book. There are 3 stages of this breed. The basic core Jewish idea is that this world can be repaired, tikkun olam, if you will, or as we often called it for 2,000 years before this, messianism, the promise of a world transformed into a paradise, into a Gan Eden. That vision and that promise is the core of Jewish tradition. But the Jewish tradition teaches, this is this remarkable approach, that you're not going to do it by your own efforts alone, any more than God will do it for you without you making an effort. What are you doing instead? What you're doing instead is you should join in a partnership. Brit, covenant, is a partnership between God and humanity. But in this covenant, I've come to see there are 3 stages. These 3 stages, the first stage is the biblical, looking back, in which God is very much the dominant partner. When the Jews are themselves desperate, have given up hope, accepted slavery, God sends Moses, God does send plagues to smash the Egyptians, drowns the army in the Red Sea, saves them. In this period when the Jews need to know where to go, they are sent a message from God directly from heaven at the Sinai, or through a prophet who comes and says, here's the Lord's message, thus saith the Lord. But according to the rabbis, this is my interpretation, and I think it's well supported in the book. In their lifetime, there was a transformation. God self-limited. The whole idea of covenant is that God self-limits. I'm not going to do this alone. I'm going to do it with you and together with you. So what God says in this intermediate stage is, I'm going to restrain myself, give you and all humans more freedom of action. So the rabbis explain, why did the Roman rebellion fail? After all, according to the biblical vision, when the Jews are on God's side, God will defeat the enemy. Why didn't God drown the Roman army in the Mediterranean Sea? The rabbi's explanation is that God is self-limited, asking humans to step up and take more power, take more responsibility. Instead of speaking Torah from heaven, you have rabbis who study the past record, but use their brain to apply the past tradition to the present moment. And they create and they addition and they improve in many cases. Women were bought and sold in the biblical period. What does the Torah do? It sets about correcting that, restoring them to the fullest vision of equality and dignity, which is an image of God. But the first step is the Torah restricts and abolishes commercial buying and selling of women, but it allows a parent to sell a woman, a daughter, on condition that the person who buys her will marry her and treat her as a free person. But that was not the end of the improvement. That was not equality. So along came the rabbis and said, under Jewish law, the husband can write a divorce. But we are going to put in a contract in every marriage that if it comes to divorce, that he must give her a financial settlement that protects her from being below the poverty line. At a time when women had no education, had very little opportunity, this was a major improvement in their status. It's not finished. I can go all the way, but all the way is that in our century, liberal movements moved for full equality for women. And among Orthodox, my wife, Lou Greenberg, and others have worked to increase women's equality, their access to learning, their access to rabbinic leadership, their access to become leaders of the community. In short, this is an unfinished journey. In the second stage, we are kind of equal partners. My argument is in the third stage, God is asking you, me, humans, to become the managing partners, to take full responsibility for the execution of this. God is with us. God will hold our hands. God will give us support. God will do more. God will judge us and tell us when we're doing wrong. God will guide us to what is right. But in the end, we have the full responsibility by our behavior. And that's the crucial point at this moment now, that we are taking responsibility. That's why I say it's a revolutionary moment. Why? Because human power is unprecedented. That means in every field, medicine, law, politics, economics, humans can do almost unlimited amount of anything. But can you do that covenantally, with restraint, with guiding principles, with partnership? That's the key to the future. Modernity overcame poverty for billions of people, but in the process, the lost sight of the partnership and accountability. So we now have a global warming crisis and a species destruction crisis. So this is the moment that the Jewish religion has to make a contribution to the world. To say taking power is key, but exercising that power calls for partnership between God and humans, between the tradition and the present moment, and between the generations, in which I'm not abandoning the past, I'm not rejecting the past, but I am building on it and improving it where it needs improvement.
So in sum, you've summarized your book and your contribution to Jewish thought throughout your life. And I'm holding up your book again. I have enjoyed reading it and seeing this is written up to, but within the last year, meaning already during the war in Gaza, this book was still being written. It took you 16 years, I understand, to write this book. Talk a little bit on one foot about the process of why this book took you 16 years.
Well, of course, in some ways it took me 40 years because some of the ideas go back that being, it builds on the past also. The second chapter of the book is called The Image of God. And of course, it describes what I still think is my most fundamental teaching. It's one that I developed really 50 or 60 years ago already now, that the image of God, a human being, it says the Torah, is created in the image of, it's the highest form of development of life ever. But what does that definition mean? Well, for one, it means that every human being, and of course the Torah says men and women, every human being, Jewish and non-Jewish, men and women, is created in the image of God. I argue in the book, based on the Talmud, that this means that every human being is born with three fundamental dignities: infinite value, your life is worth more than any amount of money; equality, and no image of God is preferred. God is neither male nor female. God is neither white nor black, neither blonde nor brunette. God is not Jewish, God is not non-Jewish. So the claim that I am a superior image of God, meaning that I am worth more than you, or that you're unequal, is idolatry. It's a falsification of God and of the image of God. And the third dignity is uniqueness. Every human being is unique. There'll be no one else like me ever again. And we have to listen to this person's uniqueness. We have to respect it. We have to use it. We have to work off it. Why do I mention all this? Because perfecting the world means creating society where humans' infinite value is respected. And to do that, you're going to have to overcome poverty and hunger. To do that, you're going to have to respect the equality. You're going to have to overcome sexism and racism and anti-Semitism. So this is the agenda of the Jewish people, but it's agenda that the whole world has to follow and learn. And our vision is at the end that the whole world is turned into a Garden of Eden. The whole world is repaired, not just the Jewish people. So now, some of the ideas I said are 50 years old. The idea that we're talking about stages, and that this stage is one in which God is totally hidden, but totally present. That means that I can find God in the secular activity, whether it's medicine or law or business, and that it's a whole new, I wouldn't say a whole new ballgame, but it's a profoundly transformed understanding of how every aspect of life, how you can, this whole thesis is really in the last 10 or 20 years that it's been developed. I have to add one more comment to that also, because it's part of, you say, why did it take so long? Well, the honest answer is that I retired hoping to write this book. Most of my other books were written in the summer because I was busy with administration. I figured I'll retire, this will be a cinch, and I'll write this book 1, 2, 3. Well, first of all, it turned out not quite. It took me 4 years. I wrote a monster thesis on this idea of Judaism represents the triumph of life and so on. When I got through, it was 1,000 pages. When I got through, I looked at it. I said, my God, first of all, not only is it too long, more important, it was academic. I stopped along the way and argued with this historian and that philosopher and this. I said to myself, well, I know what I've done here. This is not the book I wanted to write. I wanted to speak to the people I've been speaking in CLAL and in Jewish Life Network and in all my teaching, which is the lay people, the rabbis who are in the trenches, living Judaism on a day-to-day basis. And this book is not for them. It's like it's for connoisseurs or people who are interested in the fun. On the other hand, I said, how am I going to edit the book of this size? It'll take years. So I put it aside. So the answer is the first 4 or 5 years went to this book, which is not yet published. Then I started over again. And I thought that would be it. Well, the Triumph of Life, it did take another 6 years. So now it's 11 years I haven't published it. And then along the way, it dawned upon me that one of the moments of insight that I realized my idea of the second stage that the rabbinic tradition is the second stage. I was so inspired by this idea that I stopped. One of my favorite texts all my whole life has been Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot. I said, I now have a key to explain Pirkei Avot in terms of the rabbis' understanding there was this major change in their lifetime where humans take more responsibility and more authority. So I stopped and I wrote a commentary on Pirkei Avot. And really, it took 6 months. It wrote itself. So now I'm up to 11 years and I published the Pirkei Avot, but still not this book. And the long and the short of it was, I ended up with a manuscript of 200,000 words. And that was great. Oh, hey, here's the catch. Then I tried to find a publisher. And the truth is, I couldn't find a publisher. Let me rephrase that. Of the 6 publishers we approached, 3 just weren't interested. One said, if you cut this 50%, I would give you serious consideration. The one publisher that said, look, we want it, we love it, we want to do it right now with Jewish Publication Society. But there's a catch. They said, our maximum is 120,000 words. So you're going to have to cut this 35%. Well, I had no choice. And luckily, I got a wonderful editor, a woman named Elie Spitz, who works for Hadar, the organization I now work with. But it took us 2 years to make that cut in a way that was not so painful that I could accept it. So the answer is that's how it ended up. A book that was going to be a cinch ended up taking 15 years before it got into print. But having said that, I have hopes now, you should know. Right now, I'm hopes of going back and editing. I started actually to edit that monster book and hope that in the next couple of years I can edit it down and publish it as well. So, but there's the story. You know, it's the famous joke. The fellow walks into this business and he says, "Is this a nonprofit organization?" They say, "Yes, it is, but we didn't plan it that way." So I would say, did this book take 15 years, way too long? The answer is yes, but it wasn't planned to be that way. You know, the book is dedicated to Harold Grinspoon. Somewhere about the 10th, 11th year of writing this book, he pulls me aside. He is a man now. He's in his 90s. He says to me, "Yitz," he said, "you promised to dedicate this book to me." He said, "I don't want a memorial book. I want this book in my lifetime." And it was irresponsible. How could you, at your age, assume you have all these years to get this done already? So
the father of PJ Library.
I'm glad it's done.
Yeah. Well, it's a great achievement. I have only a regret, and that is that some podcasters get 3+ hours to do interviews. We're limited to 1. So with that, I'm going to stop at this point to turn it over to Sherelle and Ari Katz, Sherelle Hurwitz, and I reserve the last 2 questions to pull this together. Thank you for this large opening, Rabbi Yitz. Sherelle, you have some questions from the audience.
Yes, we do. So there are a few questions. I'll start with the larger ones and then go into more specific ones. So one is this question. You mentioned not abandoning the past, but also looking forward. So are there Jewish thinkers or maybe non-Jewish thinkers that you look at nowadays and say these are people worthwhile reading, listening to, hearing?
Well, I'm certainly not the only one who's trying to learn from the past as well as carry it with us into the future. So the answer is there are a lot of thinkers out there in his lifetime, or in their lifetime, I should say. I was close friends with David Hartman, and who's also written about covenant and struggled with the past and present. I was a friend of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who also has struggled with trying to resolve tradition and contemporary needs. I would say the difference between the two was that Hartman, who both share the Orthodox background that I do, but Hartman was much more willing, as I was in the end, to admit where it needs change, where it needs improvement. And I think Rabbi Sachs, maybe out of love of the tradition, was much more reluctant to concede that possibility, that there would be corrections needed. And again, let me not make this vague so maybe people understand what's at stake. One example is the women I mentioned already. The tradition says women are images of God, which means that they're meant to be equal, but in fact, they're not equal in the Orthodox tradition. And one of the serious problems that my wife has struggled with the last decade, the so-called Aguna problem, is because the men were given the authority to issue a get exclusively, and some terrible but smart, sophisticated lawyers and men figured out if the men have the exclusive power to issue a get, they can withhold the get and extort from the women concessions on economic support, on family visits, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot to be done to complete that. And I think Rabbi Sachs struggled with that question and was much more reluctant to admit that. The other example is gay people, very bluntly. The tradition in the biblical phase, very hostile, not just against, very hostile to gay people, and really considers it a deviance and extra. Now, we are living in the 20th and 21st century. And it seems to me, if we're honest about it, we now know from medicine and from science that gay is not a perverse choice of the opposite of natural, which is what it was described by Moshe Feinstein, the greatest Orthodox, if you will, Haredi decisor of the 20th century. He said to gay, it's a perverse choice to go against what the Torah wants you to do. We now know that this is a natural and true experience. Some people are attracted to same sex in the same way that I or others are attracted heterosexual. Now, the movement, so number one is my answer is that the Torah's rejection, hostility, reflects, let's say, the Greek version of homosexuality. It was an old boys network. It was based on a kind of power. You look at the Iliad, Achilles, the greatest hero of the Iliad, brings along Patroclus, a kind of a friend who's a sex toy for him. And he keeps with him at the front. Achilles is fully capable of heterosexuality. He has a wife and children at home. But he doesn't go home. He likes to hang around with the boys. And then as part of that, so expresses his power and sexual control of Patroclus. So we're talking about the opposite kind of homosexuality as we see today in the culture that is speaking for gay marriage. What gay marriage says is we are prepared to live by this natural behavior pattern, by the standards of religious, ethical authenticity that the tradition has for heterosexual, meaning it's based on relationship. It's not an exercise of physical activity, casual. It grows out of sex, expresses and grows out of and grows into relationship. Secondly, it is faithful, not promiscuous. And thirdly, it's open to creation of family. And that's exactly what gay marriage is all about. So if we are trying to follow God, if we are trying to live up to the values of the tradition, my argument is we would have to say that a gay sexuality that is committed to faithfulness, to monogamy, to family, is in fact religiously as valid and as significant as heterosexual is, if it's done properly. I mean, heterosexual also can be promiscuous and anti-family, in which case we criticize and reject it as well. So these are examples where I think, despite his really valid and positive and magnificent interpretation of the tradition, Rabbi Sachs was not ready to go that far. Now, how about liberal thinkers? Again, the answer is both in the liberal community. I've learned from people like Rachel Adler or Judith Plasko, even if I disagree with some of their viewpoints. I've learned from Jean Borowitz, Olav Shalom. I've learned from liberal Reform Jews. I've learned from many, Heschel obviously, and Heschel he's officially conservative. I think he's really across all denominations. And of course, there are Christians. Yes, I learned from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the saintly, martyred Christian, anti-Nazi. I've learned from many Christian thinkers, Reinhold Niebuhr. And the answer is, as Maimonides says, accept the truth from wherever it comes, rather than close out the truth because it's a different religion or a different person.
So that's a beautiful segue to another question that we received. There was a question about what do you think Jews should be doing to move or to shape Jewish-Christian relations, especially now with the new Pope? And how do you view?
I'll make this a much shorter answer. The answer is I do believe that the Jewish-Christian dialogue is one of the great religious transformations of all time. A world religion, Christianity, has 1.9 billion followers, has publicly admitted that for 2,000 years it abused, mistreated, misrepresented its mother for faith. It's a repentance act. I mean, frankly, I wish the Jewish religion and my religious authorities had the courage and the depth to admit where we have things to correct and we have done things wrong. So it's one of the great transformations. And yes, I must say, I didn't join this. I joined the dialogue because I felt Christianity had created these anti-Semitic, anti-Judaic attitudes, poisoned Western culture with them, and Hitler uses these backgrounds to isolate and to attack the Jews. So I joined to criticize and challenge the Christians, but I discovered that there was a major movement inside this own tradition to correct itself, to make reparation. And this has been the task of the past 75 years. And the truth is, they have come a long, long way to admitting the validity, the so-called the gifts of God are irrevocable, to interpret Paul in a new way, not as saying Judaism is finished, but that Judaism continues and that it can be learned from and it can never be forfeited, because the anti-Semitic version was you killed God and therefore God has stripped you of your covenant. That's all over. Now, having said that, it came a long way, and to the point where Pope John Paul spoke of us as the elder brothers and so on. With Pope Francis, who initially was continuing this path toward full equality and full dignity for Jews, seems to have regressed at the last part of his life, and his comments about Gaza were thoughtless and insensitive and quite unfair. So I was very concerned there, because I feel there's a danger that there's a regression to the old hostile, dismissive understanding of Jews and Judaism. But I'm hopeful the new Pope will be much more constructive. For one, he studied at Chicago Theological Union. One of the leaders of the Christian rethinking of itself was Father John Palikowski, who was one of his teachers. There were many other, I have no point going through all the names now. My point is, I'm hopeful, therefore, that this new Pope will go back to this path of rediscovering and reaffirming the full equality, the full dignity, the non-superseded nature of Judaism. And I think it certainly calls for an investment by the Jewish people. The real risk politically and religiously in our lifetime is Islam. And it's a tragedy, because Islam is right now dominated by jihadi, hostile, anti-pluralist viewpoints. It's not only angry at the Jews, not only in the case of the Shiites in Iran wanting to wipe out the Jews, but it has the same attitude. Anybody who disagrees with their version of Islam is a kafir and is a heretic and can be killed. So they need a reformation of the similar quality. I hope in time they will have a dialogue with Jews that will enable this to take place.
Thank you. As promised, I'm going to pass it back to Rabbi Spitz for the last two questions before we close this session.
I do hope this, again, is the second opportunity we've had through CSP to talk. I'm hoping for a third. So this is giving notice to Sherelle and to Ari. I would welcome a third opportunity to discuss the triumph of life. I note that you had your birthday on May 16th, turning 92, Kanai Nahora, on your last birthday. Looking forward to another conversation with you, but in the interim, a sensitive question, Rabbi Yitz. How would you wish to be remembered?
Well, let me half dodge that question. Well, how I wish to be remembered. I hope I'll be remembered as someone who loved God, who loved the Jewish people, and who tried to understand Melamed Zechut, to defend them and their dignity and their value, but felt that this could be done not at the expense or by the negation of the non-Jew. And in fact, to me, this is the great opportunity of our lifetime. People are exposed to each other. In past history, every religion lived separately in its own ghetto, in its own box. And naturally, it's easy to present your view as perfect and the other guy is rotten. The great miracle of our time is that all these walls fell and we now see each other. And you know what? That's why there's a lot of drift away from religion, because tradition is seen as bigoted or dismissive of rarely worthwhile other religions. So to me, that's the great challenge. Pluralism, to learn how to affirm my own truth, but to know its limits, that it doesn't cover everybody, that God has many messengers, that tikkun olam will demand multiple partners and multiple religions and multiple secular movements to achieve this world repair. So I want to be remembered as somebody who spoke up. Martin Luther King, I loved him. He said he wants to be a drum major for righteousness. I would say I want to be a drum major for love and for common solidarity, for hope of transforming the world. I'd also say I hope that I'll be remembered as a model of someone who loved his wife and children and family as well, and that is not a small part of what human beings are called to be. It's called to build a better world, but it also means it starts at your own home. In fact, maybe I'll take advantage to put in one other plug for the book. I feel one of the best insights of the book, which I love, it's based on, I call living on this side of life. My contention is that the central message of Judaism is life, choose life. And this is based on Maimonides' treatment of a Moses passage in the Deuteronomy. Moses says, when he summarizes the Torah, I put before you today life and good, death and evil, choose life. He says all the commandments, all the guidelines, all the values, all the stories are about, on one side, good and life, and the other side, evil. And he says every good action is a choice of life in some way. Every bad, evil action is a choice of death. Every good action is a choice of quality and positive quality of life of the other. Every evil deed is a choice of degradation or lowering the quality of life of another person. So I believe Judaism, that this is a central message and has not been emphasized enough. B, I believe, this is my claim, the concept of halakha is not a legal system, it's not observances. It says, study every human behavior in your life, eating, sleeping, talking, working, driving. Each of these, study how you can maximize life and minimize death. When you go driving, you want to maximize life, reduce your carbon footprint. Drive an electric car, not a fossil fuel car. Reduce your carbon imprint by using mass transport when you can. And so literally there's no action, your words. The next word I say can be a word of emptiness and boredom and routine, in which case I've chosen death because you're a few minutes older and you'll learn nothing new. So you died a little bit. Or I can have words of insight, words of reconciliation, words of opportunity, words of hope, words of giving people a chance to fulfill their own best capacity. So the next word can be a word of life, or it can be lashon hara, a word that degrades and puts people down. So I think that's what I want to leave as the central guideline to Jewish way of living and Jewish behavior. Every action, stop and look at it. You'll see that eating is not just kosher. It means eating healthy because that's a choice of life. It means not eating overfished or over-destroyed species because that's a form of degrading life. And I hope that this will be one of the main messages that people will take from me and my teaching legacy, that in every moment of your life, you can choose life or maximize choosing life or embrace it as against giving aid and comfort to those who are evil or who are choosing death.
Thank you, Rabbi Yitz. You have enhanced my life, and I know, speaking for those who are listening, you have been an exemplar of choosing life. Thank you. Until we meet again, stay safe.
Thank you all. Be well, be safe.
Thank you so much. I'm going to use a last moment for another plug-in just to wish Rabbi Spitz Mazel Tov on his newest book about sleep being accepted by a publisher. So we're looking forward to reversing roles and interviewing you. And Rabbi Greenberg, I'm just echoing all the comments in the chat, thanking you for this inspirational talk and definitely adding more life to our day or evening. So thank you very much. Toda rabba.
Be well. Be well.